Welcome, everybody. I'm Pamela Delisle, the director of the Bach Institute, and I am thrilled to welcome you all to our afternoon's talk, the B minor Mass, Bach's Musical Legacy, presented by dear friend of Emmanuel Music, distinguished professor emeritus of musicology at Harvard University, Christoph Wolff. We have a handout. I hope you've all had a chance to get that, and we're going to spend this next hour listening to and talking about the various aspects of Bach's approach to the B minor Mass. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Pamela. I'm always happy to be at Emmanuel. It's an amazing performing group, performing for an amazing audience. Today, I will make some introductory remarks regarding the B minor Mass, which is going to be performed next weekend, I think Saturday evening. More than 200 years ago, in 1818, the Swiss composer, writer, and music publisher Hans-Georg Nägeli acclaimed Bach's Mass in B minor, I quote, "the greatest musical work of art of all ages and of all peoples." He had acquired the handwritten unpublished score from the estate of Bach's granddaughter Anna Carolina and now planned to publish the work. However, referring to it as the greatest musical work of art was an astonishing assertion made at a time when Beethoven's fame had reached its peak. By comparison, knowledge of Bach was rather hazy. Professional musicians were aware of his name as a supreme master of fugue. He was known for the Well-Tempered Clavier, a substantial body of works for organ, but his vocal compositions, notably the Passions and the Mass in B minor, let alone the cantatas, remained completely unknown at the time. It is true, however, that there was a faint general awareness of this unknown side of Bach, notably in professional musical circles. For it can hardly have been a coincidence that Haydn, in his old age, took the trouble of acquiring a manuscript copy of the B minor Mass. Even the audience in Hamburg that in 1784 heard Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach conduct the Credo section from his father's Mass was ready to acknowledge that they, I quote, had never heard before and would probably never hear again such kind of music. But the aforementioned claim by Nägeli essentially represented an intuitive judgment, not based on empirical observation. Nevertheless, it had the immediate side effect of making Beethoven, then at work on his Missa Solemnis, a bit nervous, so that he asked his publisher Breitkopf to get him a copy of the Bach score. Beginning work on his large-scale Mass, he wanted to know the dimensions and scope of Bach's work in the same genre, pronounced by Nägeli the greatest musical work of art of all ages and all peoples, the kind of work he wanted to write himself. Time has taught us to be more cautious with the use of superlatives, and a modern-day critic would certainly not repeat Nägeli's exaggerated declaration, even though it was not altogether preposterous. At the beginning of the 21st century, both autograph scores of Bach's and Beethoven's great masses, which are kept in the music department of the Berlin State Library, were added to the UNESCO Memory of the World Register, recognizing them as exceptional documents of the intellectual history of humankind. So it is worth finding out what makes the B minor Mass so unique. In the final analysis, of course, neither the composer's autograph nor any printed score, but only the sound of the music itself That is, only the performance reveals the unique nature of this most special work of art. It may, however, be useful to take some historical facts and context into consideration as well. For the B minor Mass, more than any other major work by Bach, presents an instance of where the questions posed by a work reflect the many levels of complexity in the composer's artistic intentions. The handout that has been distributed and that you have with you, I hope, provides a single-page overview of the entire B minor Mass, an annotated table of contents, so to speak. It lists its 4 sections, its 27 movements, and more than that, the table of contents gives you the date of origin of the individual liturgical sections and the chronology of the work's genesis. What you see is the makeup of Bach's score, which was never bound in his lifetime. It was kept in 4 separate fascicles in, of course, the composer's handwriting from the last years of his life. The first segment, Roman 1 on your handout, is the Missa, consisting of Kyrie and Gloria of the ancient Mass text that Bach dedicated in 1733 to the new Prince Elector of Saxony and King of Poland, Friedrich August III, with the hope to obtain a court title in Saxony so that he could improve his position in Leipzig vis-à-vis the town council and other adversaries that made his life often rather miserable. And he actually received the title. It took a few years because Bach also held the title of Court Kapellmeister of Weissenfels, Sachsen-Weissenfels, and he had to wait until the Duke died so that he could obtain the title from another court. But by 1736, 3 years later, he had the title of Royal Polish and Electoral Saxon Court Composer, which he kept until the end of his life, and that benefited him a great deal. You can further see on this table that the Mass of 1733 has a orchestration, a scoring for 5-part choir, 2 sopranos, alto, tenor, and bass, SSATB, 3 trumpets, timpani, corno da caccia as brass instruments, then 2 sets of woodwind instruments, 2 flutes and 2 oboes, alternating with oboe d'amore, then the string section and a continuo section consisting of 2 bassoons, violoncello, violone, and organo. We know that because we have a complete set of parts for this part of the B minor Mass. We do not have a complete set of parts for any other section, but we have, of course, Bach's instrumentation. The second section is the Symbolum Nicenum, which was newly composed in the early 1740s, and Bach kept working on it until about 1748-49. It has essentially the same orchestration and scoring for 5-voiced choir as the Missa. Now, writing for 5-part choir is something special. Bach normally writes for 4-part choir, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. All the cantatas he composed are written for 4-part choir. But for example, another Latin work, the Magnificat of 1723, the first festive Latin work he composed, was also scored for 5-part chorus. So it's a particularly festive choral sound if it is written for 5 parts. Then the third part of the Mass is the Sanctus, which is actually the oldest part, composed for Christmas in 1724, and it is scored for 6-part choir, so particularly festive, the only 6-part choral work that we have of Bach, for 2 sopranos, 2 altos, tenor and bass. Originally actually for 3 sopranos, alto, tenor and bass, but Bach rescored it later on for the 6 voices that I have listed here. And it contains a wind section for 3 oboes. So the poor third oboe has to wait until the Sanctus in order to get active. The fourth part is containing the Hosanna Benedictus Agnus Dei et Dona Nobis Pacem, the concluding segments of the Latin Mass, which Bach added to the score in 1748-49, partially based on music that existed prior to that time. If you look at the table of contents as a whole, you can see that it consists of 27 movements altogether, and I have indented the solo movements. And that makes clear that 18 of the 27 movements are choral movements. The proportion of choral participation is unusual in the B minor Mass. It's very different from the St. John and St. Matthew Passions. So the proportion of choral vocal pieces is making a big difference in the B minor Mass, and it is a more challenging work for any choir. Now, if you look now at the individual sections, let's take a close look at the Missa, the first part. It begins with the 3-movement Kyrie section, and you can see how Bach is planning the architecture of this work. The Christe Eleison is the centerpiece as a duet framed by 2 choral movements. And if you look at the key structure, I've given you the keys in the 3rd column. It starts with a B minor section. Then the 2nd movement is in D major, and the 3rd movement in F sharp minor. So B, D, F sharp. We have a B minor chord at the beginning of the work. And you can also quickly see, if you look at the key structure, that it is actually a D major Mass, because D major is the prevailing key of the piece, and it was called B minor Mass only in the late 19th century. Nägeli, the publisher, had published it as Die Hohe Messe, but since Beethoven's Missa Solemnis, and if you translate Missa Solemnis, is also Hohe Messe, so he wanted to, or people wanted to distinguish the B minor Mass, which was rarely performed in the 19th century, by giving it the name that refers to the key of its opening movement. There are other movements in B minor, but the prevailing key for the piece is the D major, because that's the key for the trumpets, and the trumpets play a major role in this work. Now, with respect to the 3-movement segment of the Kyrie, it has a Trinitarian character, and that is important for the entire Kyrie and Gloria section for the Mass. The Trinitarian theology that is part of early Christianity refers to the Trinity of God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And these three movements are reflecting this Trinitarian structure. So does the Gloria, which consists of 12 movements, and it's an entity that is also constructed in a very special way. Every choral soloist has a role. That is, all 5 solo voices are receiving a solo movement. And since Bach wanted only to have 4 movements, one has to be a duet. And the duet, Domine Deus number 8, is again referring to the second article of the Creed, that is the Christ, and it relates to the Christe eleison. So we have 2 duets that refer to the second article of the Creed, and the same is true of the duet in the Symbolum Nicenum, that is movement 15, Et in unum Dominum Jesu Christum. Again, the second article is highlighted by Bach by giving it a scoring for 2 solo voices. Now, if you look at the Gloria section, movements 4 to 12, you see that the solo movements make use of the various instrumental families. So all the instruments are represented. The strings by the solo violin in number 6, the woodwinds by, or the labial woodwinds by the flute in number 8, the reed instruments by the solo number 10, and then the brass instruments. Bach didn't want to have a solo trumpet piece. He could have easily written one, but he wanted to have a very special sound representing the brass group, and that is the corno da caccia. So a hunting horn, which is used for the quoniam, the second last movement, and it also has a delicate accompaniment by 2 bassoons, a very rare combination of instruments. It's actually unique in Bach's work, so we have this very special instrumental color at the end of the Gloria. And what you can see, this ancient angelic hymn, Gloria in excelsis Deo, is making use of all the resources the orchestra and the choir has in terms of choral voices, in terms of solo vocal voices, and representing all instrumental families by a separate exposition of a solo instrument. Now, looking at the second section, the Symbolum Nicenum, we have a 9-movement structure. Eventually, it actually used to be 8 movements, and Bach at the very end, probably in mid-1749, decided there was something wrong with the 8-movement structure, and he composed a new movement. How did he do it? He carved out the text Et incarnatus est that was originally part of the duet number 15. So he retexted the solo part for aria number 15 so that he had a new text for the Et Incarnatus Est, which is the last composition, in all likelihood the last vocal composition that Bach wrote. And it is at the same time, stylistically, one of the most modern settings Bach ever composed. And the result is giving us 3 movements: Et Incarnatus Est, Crucifixus, et Resurrexit. In other words, the biography of Christ is now at the center of this creed, and it's represented by 3 very distinct choral movements. So we have a symmetry of movements: 2 opening choruses, 2 concluding choruses, and a triplet setting of choruses at the center, and in between 2 solo movements, number 15 and number 19. So there is one other thing which distinguishes the Symbolum Nicenum, that is the Nicene Creed that is representing early Christianity from the Council of Nicaea in 325. So it's a very old text, and Bach gives it a specific character by inserting a medieval chant in the movement that opens the Symbolum Nicenum, Credo number 13, and the same cantus firmus is continued in the Confiteor, movement number 20. So this gives the entire section a new aspect. I will single out the Sanctus in a moment, but let me briefly say something about the concluding movements, Dona Nobis Pacem. Every listener of the Bimana Mass is surprised to see the return of the Gratias Agimus Tibi, that is movement number 7, at the very end of the piece. Why is that so? Now, let me give you a quick summary of the history of the movement in its composition. It started with a town council cantata, Wir danken dir Gott, wir danken dir. We thank you, God, is the text, in 1730, composed for the festive annual town council election service. And in that movement, Bach picked from the liturgy of the Latin main service in Leipzig, which was held every Sunday, the cantus firmus of the last versicle that concludes the service, and that is Deo dicamus gratias, and I can sing it for you. Deo dicamus gratias. So ba da 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 dam bam bam. It's the same melodic contour that Bach uses for the gratias, and then he returns to it at the very end, because these are the last musical sounds of every Sunday service in Leipzig. So it's very well thought of when he returns to the music of the gratias at the end for the Dona Nobis movement. Now, from the beginning of its modern performance history, the Bimana Mass has been admired not only for its unparalleled musical strength, but also, perhaps even more so, for its power of expression and its spiritual dimensions. The powerful word-tone relationship is the most crucial element of the work, as such also intended by the composer. And I would like to discuss 2 representative examples that illuminate Bach as a musical interpreter of sacred texts. First, the Sanctus, which became part of the B minor Mass only in the late 1740s. Bach had decided to integrate this very special Christmas Sanctus of 1724 as part of the B minor Mass. But this movement, composed essentially in 1724, provides an instructive case of pre-compositional activity, that is, Bach premeditating the text to be said. Originally written, as I mentioned, for Christmas service, it is scored for 6-part choir, 3 trumpets and timpani, 3 oboes, strings, and continui. It was first performed in the same service as the Choral cantata Gelobet seist du Jesu Christ, cantata number 91, scored for 4-part choir, 2 horns, but also 3 oboes, then strings and continuo. In terms of sonorous splendor, sheer volume, and powerful expression, the Sanctus definitely eclipsed the cantata. Unlike most of the texts of the Latin Mass, the words of the Sanctus are of biblical origin, not of dogmatic theological origin, but the Sanctus literally quotes a phrase from Isaiah 6, expressing the vision of the prophet. And let me read the portion of the Isaiah text. I saw the Lord, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of its glory. Now Bach sets these these 2 lines in 2 different ways, all for 6-voiced chorus. Holy, holy, holy is the first segment, and then the whole world is full of his glory as the second part. He differentiates them duple meter, triple meter. So it's very clear in its makeup. And the number 6 is very clearly represented by the 6 seraphim and the 6 wings and all of that taken directly from Isaiah. Bach structures the score in the form of a polychoral setting for 6 choirs. Now, you won't notice it if you listen to the B minor Mass, and they rarely rearrange performers today, the choir, in such a way. But what the autograph score clearly makes visible is the 2 vocal choirs comprise 3 parts each. A top choir, soprano, soprano, alto, and a lower choir, alto, tenor, and bass. Then we have 3 distinct instrumental choirs, 3 trumpets and timpani representing the brass, 3 oboes representing the woodwinds, 3 upper strings, 2 violins and viola, and finally the continuo group making up the 6th choir. So they all play together as groups. The 3 trumpets invariably stand together, and the 3 oboes also stand together, as do the violins and the continuo group. So the 6 choral segments are very clearly noticeable in Bach's score, and they create a sound like no other vocal work of Bach's. So not only the graphic organization of the score makes this arrangement very clear. Also, the rhythmic structure reflects the numbers 3 and 6 as well, triplets throughout. Ta-da-da-da-da-da-dum. So this is a clearly very thoughtful translation of the text into musical structures. 6 drum beats per measure in the timpani and so forth. So very thoughtfully put together. And then Bach translates the atmosphere of awe into widely spaced musical sound and thereby recreates musically the vision of the presence of God, who is invisible, but whose strain with its endless theme completely covers the floor of the temple. And I play for you an example now, the opening segment of the Sanctus, and listen to the 6 choirs, but particularly pay attention to the bass, because the bass is representing the image of the invisible God whose strain fills the temple in octave leaps, moving through 2.5 octaves in the bass region. The example now. Is moving. Moving up. That's the first section of the Sanctus, and it's a very impressive translation of the Isaiah text into musical sound. The second example, and the last example I would like to give you, is taken from the Creed and its first movement, Credo in unum Deum, I believe in one God. A text that is one of the most abstract statements conceivable, pure theological dogma without any reference to imagery as in the Isaiah text, or the biblical narrative, the life of Christ at resurrected, the ascension, music moving up, or the crucifixion, the painful situation depicted by Bach in also musical terms. So Credo in Unum Deum is very abstract. And so the composer probably thought very hard about how to set this in an appropriate and meaningful way. A truly challenging assignment for a composer, finding the appropriate musical vessel for such an abstract and difficult text. Now, Bach must have discussed this with his students, and he was very proud with the result, and some of his students copied this very movement in the early 40s. It was probably the first movement he conceived for the Symbolum Nicenum in the early to mid 1740s. And at that time, Bach had a particularly gifted group of particularly gifted group of private students who were working with him and who were interested in this kind of challenging assignment, setting a text to music that doesn't lend itself to natural music expression. Bach's point of departure for the Credo opening is the ancient liturgical Credo intonation, a medieval chant still recorded in the Leipzig hymnal of Bach's days and regularly sang at the holidays by the officiating pastor, and followed by the 3 strophes then of Luther's Credo hymn, which was sung every Sunday. But only the opening Credo in Unum Deum was sung by the pastor, and then the Choral followed. So he picks up on this medieval tradition for the B minor Mass, which of course is an 18th century composition, but we get the flavor of timelessness from the very beginning. So Bach structured the piece in such a way that it makes no use of the orchestra except for the basso continuo and for 2 violins, but the violins are not treated in a virtuosic manner, but they are actually substitutes for vocal lines. So they present exactly the same style as the vocal voices in the 2 upper voices. So we have a 7-part motet structure, and the motet structure is typical of the style of 16th century vocal polyphony. So Bach makes reference to the period of the Reformation as a particular important period for his faith, and so he starts with the medieval chant, which goes back to the 9th century, and then uses the medieval, the Reformation style 16th century vocal polyphony for the entire vocal setting. And then we have the Baroque element of the basso continuo, and it's distinct by its running quarter notes. Bum, 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 bum. So very different from what the choir voices sing. So we have 3 layers of musical structure in the composition, and it's very clearly distinguishable for the listener if you pay attention to it. So we have the Gregorian chant intonation, which is then also serving as a theme for a 7-voice polyphonic imitative motet, and the underpinning is the 18th century basso continuo. So we have a diachronic arrangement by Bach of this piece, which in general then is meant to represent the timelessness of the Creed, and the statement of Credo in unum Deum is not a statement made by Bach and his contemporaries. It has been made for centuries before him, and he would assume it would continue for centuries after him. Let's listen to the piece. Pay attention to the 3 layers. It starts with the intonation. Let's do the beginning of the next movement so that you can hear the contrast. Now we have the full Baroque orchestra with trumpets and everything. It's patrem omnipotentem, the omnipotent quality of God is, of course, represented with everything that Bach could use, whereas the opening is very modest. It's an a cappella sound. The orchestra is reduced to, either vocal performance in the violin or the continuo, which is the underpinning of the vocal polyphony. Just the beginning of the patrem. So Bach is planning, these kind of differences and contrasts in order to really keep his listeners attentive to the text. Let me conclude. It is not merely Bach's remarkable command of compositional technique, his sophisticated polyphonic style, and the wide range of expression in his musical language. It is also his sense of history, his deep knowledge of musical repertoires and styles from chant and Renaissance polyphony through the wide variety of the musical scene of his day. Especially if you look at the central movements of the Creed, et incarnatus est crucifixus and et resurrexit, contrasting styles in a very remarkable way. At work on the B minor Mass, Bach was conscious of having to deal with an ancient musical genre that never lost its impact. Accepting the challenge, he realized that the universal claim of the Latin Mass required a commensurate response on his part, a response commensurate in terms of both musical and theological dimensions. The B minor Mass represents an artistic legacy reflecting and summarizing nearly 4 decades of Bach's investment in sacred music. And as such, it preaches a vivid and vibrant musical and spiritual sermon. Its repercussions began more than 200 years ago, and its echo appears to be infinite, for its message is continually revitalized and re-energized with every new performance. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We have some time for some questions, if there are any questions. I'll just repeat what you say so that we make sure that our online listeners also can hear. So,
thank you for the comments. Was Bach writing the B minor Mass around the same time as the Art of the Fugue? And if so, what are your thoughts about the two works?
Yeah.
Was there
the projects run exactly parallel. The entire final decade of Bach's life, in the 1740s, he was working on both the Art of Fugue and the B minor Mass. And I would refer to both works as particularly legacy projects. The Art of Fugue represents the instrumental equivalent, if you will, of the B minor Mass, dealing with ancient polyphony from the early styles of fugal technique. If you take the first 4 movements of the Art of Fugue, they sound like Renaissance music, and then it becomes more and more modern. And also virtuosic and technically challenging. So it's essentially the same kind of approach, but focusing on instrumental music rather than on the vocal tradition. But in both instances, he picks a genre that is representative of the history of music, because he then defines for his students, and Bach had, we can name today almost 200 students that he was private students, not the St. Thomas students. They would add up to a few hundred more. But he was the music pedagogue of the history of music. There is no other major composer we know of who had this kind of pedagogical impetus.
any other questions?
I'm unfamiliar with what you were talking about, the Sanctus. Was the piece just something he offered as part of a concert, did I understand, or was an actual mass? And
well, the Sanctus was a regular part of the Leipzig Lutheran worship service, and Bach used, for the most part, Sanctus compositions by other composers. He wrote 3 Sanctus compositions himself, 2 very short Sanctus, as there was no room in the liturgy for a longer piece, and the Sanctus for Christmas 1724 was exceptional in its length. It took 5 minutes to perform the whole thing, which is long for a Sanctus. So, but it was planned as a liturgical composition and performed as such.
Thank you. I have a question about the parodies or material from cantatas. So you mentioned in Gratias, from Cantata 29, from Wir danken. So there was an obvious fit of the of the material, of the topic. But for others, is there any key regarding to topic? Which areas Bach picked, other than that he considered them important?
Bach very carefully picked a few existing compositions that he was interested in that could fit the new liturgical text of the Latin Mass. I'll give you one example. The movement Crucifixus, the centerpiece of the Creed, was taken from a Weimar cantata, Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen. So it's interesting to speculate why Bach picked this piece. First of all, it's one of his best choral movements. He had written in his 30s. So it was 40 years old by the time he picked it for the B minor Mass. But it has Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen, 3 different German words, meaning essentially lamenting. So it's the repetitive structure of lament that is giving the composition its particularly expressive strength. And he uses that for the repeat of the Crucifixus. And of course, in the background is the lament character. The Crucifixus is not a happy movement. It really refers to the crucifixion of Christ and the suffering on the cross. And therefore, the original German composition, Weinen, Klagen, Sorgen, Sagen, is quite appropriate, but he recomposes the piece significantly. So if you put the 2 compositions, the original German cantata movement and the Mass movement next to each other, you can see that Bach was working very hard to give the Mass movement its own character, which distinguishes it very clearly from its original model. And that happens in a few other movements as well.
Are there any other questions? Well, thank you so much, Professor Wolff. We really appreciate all of your scholarship.
Thank you. Thank you.